Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Hughes. Welcome to the Reconcile podcast. We're so glad that you're here. We believe that God is calling all of us to a better future and to look inside and see our potential. That's really what this podcast is all about. So I'm glad that you checked this message out. Hope that you enjoy it and be encouraged. Let's all go out and reconcile the world.
Well, like Austin said, my name's Matt, and I love every time Nate goes out of town and asks me to speak because I love getting to see you guys. It's awesome. And I love getting to share. One of the things I try to do is any topic I get a chance to speak from, I try to connect with it and share my heart on it. And it was funny because like Austin was starting to steal my opening story, but Nate said, hey, I want you to speak on failure, and I think you'll do really good at that. And I'm like, Nate, do you think I'm like an expert at failing? And he's like, yeah, kinda. I'm like, wow, okay. And at first, I was totally not offended, first of all. But secondly, I thought about it, I'm like, I kind of am. And I'll explain that later as we get into this. But as is tradition, I have to always start with a story about one of my daughters. And usually the youngest one gets this story. And that's no exception tonight. So you chaos leaders, you heard the story. I apologize to you guys. But it's just too funny. I have to share it. So for the longest time, my daughter, I shared a little bit of this last time. She had 3 oral surgeries in her first year of life. And so for her, one of just a very difficult thing is anything having to do with her mouth. She's just super protective of her mouth. And I don't know, maybe that's a little kid thing. Maybe it's her because of the stuff she's gone through. But she hates having her teeth brushed, like hates it. And I realized in January I got to speak. I was looking at my notes from January, and I totally told a tooth story in January, but it was about pulling a tooth from one of my daughters, so this is a different tooth story. I don't think I have more than 2 tooth stories, but apparently you get to hear them both. So I'm like knocking my head against the wall. How do I get this girl to brush her teeth? Like, I have to literally hold her down and she screams, and I feel like a horrible dad, I'm like holding her down to brush her teeth. So I don't know how this happened. It was organic. Like one day I just started like chasing her around the house, acting like a dinosaur, right? As one does, right? And you got to do the little arms, right? Like a T-Rex. And I like going like this, because that's what a dinosaur, I don't even know. And I started chasing her around the house. And then I realized, light bulb, what if I use the toothbrush and chase her, and she might like let me brush her teeth if it's a game? And that's what happened. I became Brushosaurus. And Brushosaurus still happens every single night. And it looks kind of like this. You gotta take the toothbrush, you gotta get your tiny little claws, and you gotta like go like this. And then, so I'm like going like this, like, come here. And she looks at me, she's just like, roar? And I'm like, roar. Yeah, so I've worked on the roar, right? The roar is, it's gotta be not like, roar. No, it's gotta be like, roar, like really next level. And like, I scared myself the last time I did that into a microphone. I'm like, ooh, that was creepy. But so I'm doing this, and I'm like, this is funny. I'm finally getting her. She's almost 3, right? I'm getting her to brush her teeth. Well, then the 7-year-old and the 10-year-old are like, Dad, chase us too. I'm like, oh my gosh. So now I have to like chase down 3 kids and brush their teeth every night, and it takes like 45 minutes because they then shut doors and don't let me in the room. And I'm like, this is going sideways. But so, there's like dad fails and there's dad like wins. I think that's in the win category. I don't know. You guys can be the judge, but it's totally fun having 3 girls. I'm in a house full of women. And even the dogs are girls. Like, I don't even know what's going on. I'm like the only guy, but it's totally cool. And so as I think about this topic of failure, right? And I was thinking a lot about it because I don't maybe people that take a lot of risks fail a lot. I don't take a lot of risks. So I'm like, well, where have I failed in my life? And I've looked at a lot of that. And I realized that failure has a couple layers to it. And we'll get into that as we go through tonight. But you guys have been looking at Peter's life. So we're going to look at Peter's most epic failure. And when I say Peter fail, you probably already go there mentally, right? This was when he denied Jesus 3 times. And so we're going to look at this, and then we're going to look at when Jesus kind of gently restored him back. 3 times also as he was on the beach after Jesus rose again. So let's look at these 3. So tonight we got no technology, so we're going to good old-fashioned open our actual Bibles if you have it, and your phone Bible if you don't have it. That's fine too. So a little bit new school mixed in there. Go to John chapter 18. And that's where we're going to start Peter's story of failure. So to set the context a little bit here, first of all, I've always been really hard on Peter for denying Jesus. If I'm being honest, I've always been kind of hard on him. Like, bro, like, what are you doing? Like, you're supposed to be the leader of this band of disciples. You don't know this yet, but you're going to lead the early church. Why are you denying you know Jesus when he is like in his most desperate moment? Like, man up. And I was thinking about that, and I think I'm hard on Peter because I'm also very hard on me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm hard on myself when I make mistakes. And it's like, man, those moments, like, I knew better than that. Why did I do that? And those moments where you're like, I knew what to do and I didn't do it. It's so frustrating. And I think that's why I'm so like on Peter's case about this. But what we have to also keep in mind is the span of emotion that's going through this man. That he was in the garden with Jesus when he was arrested. And Peter was the guy that sprang to fight. He's the guy that had Jesus' back. He pulled out a sword and cut a dude's ear off, right? And then Jesus scolded him for doing that, basically, saying, put your sword away, healed the guy's ear in front of him. Like, a lot is going on. And then Jesus gets kissed by Judas. What's he doing? I don't know. And then he gets arrested, and he gets taken away. And so now Jesus has been kind of ushered off into this inner court for this trial. I was about to say mock trial. It wasn't a mock trial, it was a real trial, but it was a mockery of a trial because it happened in the middle of the night, and it was totally quick, and it seemed like they already knew what they wanted to do, right? And so Peter is left out. He's outside the courtyard. They didn't even let him in. But John if you ever notice in the book of John, John will never call himself John. He'll give himself a nickname, like the disciple Jesus loves or the other disciple that was there. And he did that here. So he was the other disciple. John had to go in and go around and like tell the person watching the door that Peter could come in, right? So he wasn't even allowed in. So have you ever been not allowed in somewhere? You're like, dude, what the heck? Like a little bit of FOMO starting to kick in, mixed with the fact that your best friend just got arrested and is facing, who knows at this point, eventually crucifixion. And so Peter's flustered. So chapter 18 of John, we're going to start reading in verse 15. Simon Peter and another disciple, that would be John, were following Jesus because this disciple was known to the high priest. He went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the girl on duty, and brought Peter in. All right, here's denial number 1. You are not one of the disciples, are you? The girl at the door asked Peter. So this is the girl who was guarding the door, right? This is the girl who didn't first let Peter in until John told her to. Right? And now as Peter's coming in, she's like, oh, you're not one of them, are you? And it's like there's accusation in her voice, maybe some judgment, maybe like she's expecting Peter to be a certain way. And so I've always kind of been like, Peter, why'd you deny Jesus? You love Jesus. But he panicked. Maybe he panicked. Maybe fear seized him. And so he says, I am not. I am not. I am not one of them. And thinking of how God identified himself in the Old Testament, and Jesus had many statements in the Gospels where he said, I am. And Peter's response was haunting when I read it. I am not. I'm not. I don't identify with him. How often do we bail on him when we shouldn't? And that's what Peter was looking at. And it leads into the second, skipping down to verse 25, the second denial is verbatim, almost verbatim, to the first denial. It says this, verse 25, as Simon Peter stood warming himself around a fire, he was asked, "You are not one of the disciples, are you?" He denied it again, saying, "I am not." You are not one of his disciples. So the only difference is his, right? His. And I imagine, like, they're in this courtyard, the trial's happening over there. The person probably said, "You're not one of his disciples." Like the finger point, right? The accusation. You don't associate with that guy, do you? This judgment, this feeling found out started to creep over Peter. And again, maybe it's a self-preservation, instinctual move, but he says, I am not. No, I'm not one of those. The next and final denial happens instantly after the second one. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. "Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove?" Again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, the rooster began to crow. This one is so interesting. And I don't know why I had never caught this before. But this time, as I was studying this, I realized, oh my gosh, like this is a relative of the guy whose ear he just cut off. There had to have been absolute dread that came over Peter. Thinking that this guy, if he knew he did that, if he knew he was the one, that maybe he would be arrested too. Maybe he would be joining Jesus on a cross. Peter freaked out. And another gospel says it this way. He called curses down upon himself. He was in full freak out mode. He didn't know what to do. Fear had gripped him to the point of him giving in. And he totally let Jesus down. He did. If we're calling it what it is, he let Jesus down. But the thing that's interesting about this, we have Peter. We've seen Peter in action. We've seen Peter at his highest. But this is Peter at his lowest. And we know that Peter would go on to do great things. He would go on to be an amazing leader of the early church movement that they called the Way, right? That he would be a man that people followed to their own graves, right? For the name of Jesus. But in this moment, he failed. But here's what I was thinking about. A leader has low moments too. And it's what a leader does in their lowest moments, after their lowest moment, how they respond to their own failure that shapes them and makes them somebody that you should follow. The rooster crowed. And I thought about that. I'm like, man, why did Jesus even predict this? How harsh is that on Peter? Hey, you're gonna fail me 3 times, and then a rooster's gonna crow to remind me that I called it. Right? It's like, dang, Jesus, like, chill. Like, that's kind of harsh. But I don't think that was his heart. Did Jesus want to shame Peter? No. Did Jesus want to cut him down? Take him down a peg? Maybe he was getting a little bit too full of himself? I don't think so. I think there was a deeper lesson that Jesus was trying to teach Peter. A deeper lesson that would spill over into Peter's leadership role in the early church. The failure that Peter was going through right in this moment would allow him to understand when the people he's leading, when they fail, how to respond to them, how to help them, how to lift them up, how to, if you're not too high in your highest high, don't be too low in your lowest low. There's grace for yourself. Grace for yourself when you fail. A reminder that you need to be humble when you fail. You need to be humble when you succeed. And this was the first one. This was the former. So here's my key idea tonight. Failure is not just inevitable because of our humanity. It's something leaders need to go through to fully relate, fully empathize with, and have grace for the people God is calling us to lead. I'm going to say that one more time since we don't have the screen up today. Failure is not just inevitable because of our humanity. It's something leaders need to go through to fully relate, fully empathize with, and to have grace for the people God is calling us to lead. There's a way to fail well. That's a weird thing to say, but I think it's true. There's a way to fail well. And I've got 4 points on this one. So the first one is this. Leaders need to have grace for themselves in the midst of their worst moments. Think, and this could be a trigger, and I apologize, think of the last time you failed. Think of the last time you just failed. And I'm going to define a couple different kinds of failure here in a minute. Did you have grace for yourself, or did you beat yourself up? Are you still beating yourself up? Are you still piling on? I heard it said that there's a difference in guilt and shame. Guilt is feeling bad about what you did. Shame is feeling bad about who you are. And God doesn't ever use shame. That's the evil one's tactic, not God's. God will convict with his Holy Spirit. He'll lovingly point out the things we need to change, but he will never define us by our failures. And so shame is not his. That's not his game. That's not how he acts. So if a leader is gonna have grace for somebody that they're leading when they fail, they need to have grace for themselves in the moment of their failure. I'm still working on it. I'm the kind of guy that is my own worst critic. I beat myself up, and I need to go easy on myself at times, you know? But I think this is the key right here. If we're going to have grace on ourselves, we can have grace on others later. So here I was thinking about, I'm like, failure is too nebulous for me. Like, we got to kind of dial it in a little bit, you know? I mean, there's different kinds of failure. So there's making a mistake. We're going to call that our first category. Making a mistake. There are times you do stupid things. Some of you I know, and I've seen you do stupid things, if I'm being honest. It's okay. You've seen me do stupid things, right? You know, that's making a mistake. Now, sometimes it's on purpose. Sometimes it's accidental. You did something dumb on accident. But making mistakes are things that sometimes will have consequences, right? If, you know, I call you a bad name to your face, the consequence is you don't want to be my friend anymore, right? I mean, that's a very simple way to simplify it, but there's consequences, right? And again, it's not just the ones that you do on purpose that have consequences. Sometimes accidental mistakes have consequences. But when you face consequences, being humble about those consequences is what makes a good leader. So the second thing is dropping the ball. Okay, and this is all from my brain. This is not from any kind of a science book. Dropping the ball is a little bit different than making a mistake, because dropping a ball is when your intentions were great, but your follow-through was poor. Okay, that's dropping the ball. And you can own that as a failure after it's done. You feel like, oh gosh, I let them down. Oh, I failed. I didn't come through. I said I would do that and I didn't. This one is very hard to let go for me, if I'm being honest. And that would be my question to you guys as you hear me talking about this. Are you able to move on when you drop the ball? Or do you just get stuck there and be like, I can't believe I did that. They're never going to trust me again. I don't even trust me again. Like, moving on and shrugging it off is difficult for a lot of us on that one. The third one. Disappointing others. You ever have your parents say, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed? Ugh, right? Like, that's the worst. That hits me, like, right in the heart. It's like, oh, yeah, I'd rather you be mad. You know, I don't want to disappoint you. And disappointing, if you're a people pleaser like me, it's like, I fear that. I don't want to disappoint anyone, right? And it's like, it hurts. And so disappointing others definitely lands in our hearts like a failure, doesn't it? It does. And this one is my bread and butter, negatively, right? Rejection. This is more of an implied failure, right? You could be rejected and not told you failed. But by being rejected, you know you failed. Does that make sense? Being left out, being not invited. Those are rejections. Not getting picked, not getting the job you applied for. Like those rejections hit hard. And I think this one can sink in and be deeply personal. And it can deeply affect us when we're rejected. And there are all kinds of rejections. I don't even have time to get into it. But when Nate told me he thought I'd be perfect to talk about failure, the next thing I thought of was something my mom told me, I want to say when I was in college. And we were just having a conversation. I was probably going through something that was, hard for me. I can't remember the details. But she said, you know what, Matt? I've always noticed that you seem to have a spirit of rejection following you wherever you go. And my first thought was, dang, Mom, that hurts, It's feels like Eeyore, in Winnie the Pooh with a cloud following me around. I'm like, is that really what I show to people? That I'm just this depressed person that always goes through pain? And I thought about it, I'm like, even if I was, that wouldn't, that's not bad. I was thinking about it, I'm like, you know what? I get what she's saying. And I've been thinking about that. And it just seems like a lot of times I don't get the job and I don't get picked and I don't get invited to the party and I realize that at first it hurts really hard and I'm super defensive of it. And then it causes me to turn back in towards God and say, you know what, God, I need you to affirm me, not anybody else. And I think God knows how to take all of these forms of failure and use them for our growth, use them for our sanctification. I want to tell you 2 failure stories of mine. And at first I thought this was going to be fun. And then I'm like, what was I thinking? It's not fun to talk about your failures. This is going to be hard, but hey, it's good. God wants me to share it. So the first one happened in 2009. We had a conference that we went to with our junior high and high schoolers called DCLA. And we went to LA in 2009. Were anyone in this room there? I'm curious. Were you there? Oh, you were there. So you're going to know this story. But you might not know it from my perspective. So this is my perspective. So we went to LA, and I was one of the main leaders on the trip. And we were at the LA Convention Center. If you guys have been in downtown LA at all, you can kind of picture where this is at. It's right next door to the Staples Center. And then we had a break for lunch, and so we all walked kind of down the street. There was this mall that was partially underground and partially had 2 floors above ground. And the food court where we were eating was underground. So we were eating our lunch, everyone was sitting in the food court, and I was starting to gather everyone to walk back to the convention center. And I'm standing and there's 3 flights of stairs that go up and out to street level. And I'm standing kind of halfway up basically there's a flight of stairs below me and a flight of stairs above me. And I'm on this landing, and I'm just counting the kids, make sure they're all nearby. And all of a sudden, it was happened so fast and so vividly. I still can picture it when I think about it. There's a guy that was wearing one of those neon yellow vests, and he was walking swiftly, and then he started to jog, and he scooped a woman's purse off of the table of the food court and started sprinting. And all at once, my first thought was is this really happening? I was all kind of clogged up because it was happening so fast. The woman screams, "Hey, that's my purse." And I'm standing here, and I have 2 of our other leaders, Jared Zimmerman, some of you know him well, and Dustin Nelson. You might know Dustin too. I look at Dustin, who's kind of from me to Nate away, and I'm like, get the purse. That's all that I could think of. I wasn't thinking, hey, Matt, you should get the purse. I was just like, I'm going to keep the kids safe. Dustin, you have a screw loose. Get the purse. That's just kind of like what happened. And so Dustin, it's like he flew up the rest of the stairs. He took 2 steps and jumped about 8 stairs in those 2 steps. And he caught the guy by the time he had just gone outside. And Jared somehow got to him about 3 seconds later. And there's this, I'm just staring at this. I still haven't moved from my spot. And I just kind of pivoted to watch it outside. And Dustin and Jared are fighting for the purse with this guy. And the guy had a car parked on the curb, and he was gonna grab it and go. And Dustin broke the purse strap and held onto the purse. And Jared, they both kind of like let the guy go. The guy jumped in his car and drove away. And then everyone was like, oh my gosh, they're heroes! It's just this moment where I can't believe that just happened. And I'm like watching this, and it was about, I don't know, half an hour later, this like not God like feeling came over me of, you should have been the hero. You should have got the credit. You said, Dustin, get the purse. That started all of this, but nobody remembers that, and it's 30 minutes later, right? And I was like, God, why couldn't I have been the hero? It was just like really lame, like crybaby moment I was having in my own head, in my own heart with the Lord. I'm like, why does he get to be the hero, and I get to be like the guy that opens the cage to let out the wild animal? Like, that's all I did. I did nothing like great. And I remember watching the woman get her purse back and give Dustin and Jared hugs and say like, oh my gosh, my ID was in there. I'm catching a flight in the morning. I wouldn't have been able to fly home. I thank you so much. And like, you guys are so awesome. And I'm like, yeah, they're awesome. God, I wanted to be awesome, And honestly, like, it was a weird rejection. Like, I didn't get any credit. Part of it was I didn't do as much as they did, but it was still very much so like, oh, that sucked. That hurt. I don't know, it just hurt. And so later that night, we were driving to In-N-Out, and I was driving a 15-passenger van with students, and Dustin was right next to me, and the hero vibes were coming off of him, and it was making me sick to my stomach. And we were just driving, and I remember having this moment, and we were stuck in traffic because it's LA, and it's 10 p.m., but why not? It's LA. And I had this moment where I heard God talk to me in my spirit and say, hey, Matt, I affirm you. You were good enough for me. I love you. And I was like, that is all I need right there. He affirms me. I live for him. I serve him. Everything I do is for him, not for the attention and the applause of man. It just isn't. And it was this pivot point for me, not just that weekend, not just because I was having a bad day, being jealous of a hero. It was more than that. I think I had lived too long in the shadow of rejection, wanting too badly to be affirmed by people that I always felt rejected by. And that was the moment where I realized I need to be okay with failing. I need to be okay with being rejected because God says I'm okay. And he is the one that gets to make that rule, not me. And it was this moment of clarity, and that changed me. It did. And these moments, where I thought I was going to be a leader and just teach stuff, I learned stuff. And it was amazing. All right, story number 2. This was last summer. So I got to go to Malawi for the first time. And who was on that trip with me? Austin was. Is he the only one in the room? Okay. So the way this worked is Paul went with us when we all left, and then he stayed for a week and then flew home. And that was the whole reason I was really going on the trip, was to help Paul. Because I'd always wanted to go to Malawi, but Paul, after Melinda's breast cancer, he needed to not be there 2 weeks, and he needed to go home. And so I was like, yeah, I want to serve Paul. I wanted to serve him. This is how I'm going to serve him. So I was all excited to help him lead the trip. So we go out there, and the first week, Paul was kind of showing me how to do things, showing me what, the way Malawi worked, and our awesome partnership with the Malawians that go to ABC, African Bible College, and work with Live Love over there. It was amazing. And I fell in love with the people, I fell in love with the country and the culture and all that. And so Paul leaves, and now it's like, it's game time. It's like, I'm the leader now. And it's hard because I had, again, I've shared with you that rejection, and the way that rejection spirit has kind of manifested itself is I'm not always so confident. I'm not always self-confident in of myself, because if people reject me and I fail, then why would anyone want to follow me? And I have to really be careful about that negative cycle. And so that's kind of where I was at. I'm like, all right, cool, I'm leading. So I'm leading this trip, and I thought things were going super duper well. And so it was the day we were gonna go into the village and spend all day in the village. And one of the things Paul had reminded the team was, like, it's very rude to not eat what they serve you. You know, it's very rude to not eat, so just take a little bit. If you don't like it, you just have to eat it. That's just how you do it. You're gonna spend all time, so you have to do that. So I'm getting up there at breakfast to tell everyone those reminders about, hey, we're going in the village, and they're gonna serve us food. And it's like an out-of-body experience. It's like, why am I saying these words I shouldn't be saying, right? I kept saying, if the food is gross, you still have to eat it. Even if you're grossed out, I said the word gross like 6 times. And it's like not even like registering in my brain that was like a very offensive thing to say, because I'm having this meeting with about 40 Malawians sitting amongst our people. And I didn't even know like what was going on. And so it was probably after the meeting, not too long, one of the leaders from the Mosaic team, not even one of the people I know on the trip, right? One of the leaders from the Mosaic team comes up to me and says, hey, I need to talk to you about something. I'm like, oh no. And he brings me over to Erwin McManus's wife. Now was about to tell me I've failed. Like, this is gonna feel real good. And so Erwin McManus's wife, Kim, and this other Mosaic leader tell me what I had done. And they're so sweet about it. Like, they're like, you guys, like, Matt, like, it's okay because we all fail and you're a leader. This is gonna be good for everyone to see a leader fail. I'm like, that's awesome. Why do I have to be that leader? Okay, that's great. So they're telling me all of this and I'm like, okay. And so this is like at dinner, and they're like, at breakfast the next morning, just get up and apologize. That's it. And then it'll be done. I'm like, great. So breakfast was like 14 hours later. 14 hours is a long time if you're in my brain to think about it and wrestle with yourself. And I was struggling. I'm like, I cannot believe I did that. Like, we have meetings sitting over here for months leading up to these trips. And one of the number one things we say is be culturally sensitive. Don't offend them. And I offended them about their food. It's like, and the food is like so personal, because if they usually can go days without food. They're so poor. I'm like, I can't believe I did this. And probably not, but it was in my head. So I get up, right? And I apologize. And it was like this, like the weight of the world just shedded off me. And it was like, and it felt so good to get it off my chest. But I realized how important it was to be real with them, to be honest, to show them that, hey, leaders fail, guys. Leaders fail. And it's not about if you fail, because you will. It's what you do when you fail. Where's that grace kick in? Where does that repentance and that heart, where does that show that, you know what, you can fail and still grow. You can fail and keep going. So the second thing you need to do if you're going to fail well as a leader is you need to be aware and active against your own pride. And that was the subplot in both stories, was my pride. My pride was like, oh, you should be the hero. You need to be the big alpha male that takes down the bad guy. That's what you need. Like, that's what my pride was telling me. And the second story, it was like, oh man, you're gonna tell everyone you failed. Oh, you're gonna look really bad in front of like a famous book writer's wife. That's gonna be awesome. That's gonna be fun, right? And all this stuff. And it was just like, oh man. But that pride is the thing we have to constantly work on. We have to be aware of it. We have to be aware that our pride can cause us to step outside what God is calling us to do. It works against us in failure. It's the thing that tells us to internalize that failure. Back to you. Remember the last time you failed. Remember maybe thinking, I'm a failure. I want to say this. This sounds dumb, but it's a mantra. I just want to say it to you. And you might need to hear this tonight. Whatever that thing is, you failed at it, you are not that failure. You are not that failure. You may have made a mistake, but you are not that mistake. You are not defined by your fails. You are not defined by those weak moments. That's not who you are. Who you are, and that's what I heard from God when I was on the way to In-N-Out that night. You are loved. You are affirmed. You're good enough. You're treasured. God loves you so much. And so whatever failure you're walking through right now, maybe it's a rejection, maybe it's a mistake, maybe you dropped the ball, maybe you disappointed somebody, you are not that disappointment. You're not that failure. You're not that rejection. That rejection doesn't get the last laugh. But God, instead, is going to use that rejection, and he is going to use that for your growth. He's going to use that to push you towards what he's calling you. And when you're leading someone someday and you say, they failed. I remember that. I remember what that felt like. You can then receive them in grace and help them get off the mat and keep going. Leaders, number 3, fail humbly. Leaders fail humbly. To fail well, you must be humble. And that's where I landed in my second story. I had all night to think about it. And when I got up at that breakfast, I literally stood on a chair. It was not great, right? And I was humble. You guys, I messed up. I missed it. I didn't say the right words. And I hurt our friends. And I'm sorry. And that humbleness is, and you can't just say it, because people can tell when you're faking it. They can tell. Fake humility is the grossest thing ever, in my opinion, right? It's don't pretend to be humble when you're not, because it doesn't work. But be humble. And you got to get there. It takes some time. It takes some prayer and some soul searching at times. But God's gentle, just like he was with Peter. He gently receives us when we fail. All right, the last thing that leaders can do to fail well, they can learn from their mistakes and have grace for those who make mistakes. When you fail, it's the lesson you learn that really shapes what happens next. It's what you do next when you fail. It's important because if you learn from it, it was worth it. Does that make sense? When you fail, it's hard to see the good in it because you're sitting in the grossness of the fail. But when you realize that God is going to use it to teach you something and to make you better and to make you grow more and to help more people, then it's worth going through the failure. It's worth going through the rejection so you can empathize with somebody else. You can help them. You can lift them up. So when, not if, you fail, my prayer for each of you is that love will be how you receive that. Let's look at Peter. Let's look at the end of his story. So if you flip over to John 21, Jesus so epically creates this scene with Peter where he takes each individual failure and he reclaims it for a moment of growth and for Peter's future. Verse 15, Jesus had resurrected, right? They have this moment where he just starts walking on the water and they're like, oh, hey, what? Jesus, gets in the boat. They go to shore. They cook this awesome fish breakfast on the beach. And then Jesus gets this tender moment with Peter. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than those? When you deny you even know somebody, it's the opposite of loving them. At least it looks like it, right? And so Jesus was giving him a chance to redeem himself. Do you love me more than those? And Peter didn't fail this time. Yes, Lord. He said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, this is the help with failure number 2. Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter this time was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. And then at the very end of his exchange with Jesus, or with Peter, Jesus says again to Peter, like he did the first time he met him, follow me. Follow me. And I love this because that third time, I love that we even see Peter being very human, it's like feeling hurt. Like, Jesus, why would you ask me again? And Jesus is like, yeah, it really hurt me when you denied me 3 times too. That really hurt. I get it. Yeah, that hurts to be asked 3 times. And yeah, but you know what? You need to be restored there, Peter. Because what had Peter been carrying around since that failure? Had he been holding on to it? Had he been thinking to himself, Jesus can't trust me again. I let him down. Had he been just holding on to the failure, like, I can't lead anymore. I'm disqualified. I let down Jesus in his most desperate hour. I'm just a background guy now. I can't be a leader. We don't get the inner dialogue because it's not recorded in Scripture, but I imagine if he's like me, that's what was going on. He was struggling with knowing if, I don't know if I have what it takes, Jesus. I let you down. But Jesus, so gently, 3 times, do you love me? And then a future command, a directive, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. Tend my flock, do my work, help others, lead them. Not from your failure, but because of your failure, you can now lead strongly. Because you know what it's like to fail. You've gone over that. You've been redeemed from that. You're not a failure, Peter. You are not a failure. You simply made a mistake. You are not a denier. You simply denied me in that moment. You are strong, Peter. You can feed my lambs. You can do the hard work with the difficult people because you've risen above this. You are redeemed. Redemption is a great word. Every great story is a redemption story, if you really think about it. This is a great story. Peter was redeemed. And if you go on to read the book of Acts, you'll see that redemption in action. You'll see Peter leading well to the point of his own death, where he felt, not even worthy to die on a cross like Jesus. He had to be upside down. It's another story for another day. But this man did not become a failure. He rose above a failure, and he lived and led well. So when you fail, receive yourself and others with grace. Love them through the hardest moments and the darkest nights. Help them write their own redemption story. Forgive even when you need to forgive yourself. That can be the hardest piece for all of us, is forgiving ourselves for failing, for disappointing. Humbly face consequences and walk the road of reconciliation. That's what we're called to do, guys. And so for me, it's easier to think of my failures than it is my successes. And that's me. That's just who I am, right? But in the same thing, like, God doesn't see it that way. He doesn't see, oh yeah, remember when he really failed? He's like, hey, remember when I redeemed you from that thing? And now you get it? I'm like, yeah, I do. And both of those stories, I learned valuable lessons from them. I'm so glad they happened. I'm so glad I failed because I learned from it. It made me stronger. It drew me closer to him. It allowed me to appreciate his redemption, his work on the cross even more because I get it. I'm not an easy person to die for, but he's teaching me every day.